A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You're listening to Now This Is Lit, a Star Wars books podcast. I'm your host, Meg Dowell. I use she, her pronouns. This week, a full spoiler discussion. Kiersten White's Star Wars Padawan. All right, how about we begin with a little bit about you. So why don't you introduce yourself and kind of tell me more about why you're here and what's up with your Star Wars reading? How you doing?
So my name is Elizabeth. I am a freelance entertainment writer, and I love Star Wars. That's why I'm here first and foremost. And the summer of Obi-Wan Kenobi, that was the summer of 2022 that we have been blessed with so much Obi-Wan content, really made me, I never disliked Obi-Wan Kenobi, but I was always like, I understand why people are super into him. I don't really get it, but the thing I love about Star Wars is everyone has their favorites, and all the content that we got this summer about him made me like understand totally. And I fell in love with him just like everyone else. I'm like, wow, I've really been missing out the last 20 odd years not seeing him for what he like, why everyone loves him. And this book especially, I really, really liked seeing this side of him and this the age that he's in, because it's such, being like 16 years old is such a moment in everybody's life, and seeing it from him, where he's this, you think of Obi-Wan and think this like cool, calm and collected, sage, wise character. And of course he wasn't always like that. So it's nice to really see him in that era.
Exactly. And like, we could have never gotten this particular era of Obi-Wan trying to figure out who he is and what he wants to be, but we did within all of this, like the summer of Obi-Wan Kenobi that we never asked for and we're just gifted anyway. Like it could have just been a book, it could have just been a comic, it could have just been a series that was possibly once going to be a movie that became this whole beautiful thing. But no, we got it all. We got multiple books featuring Obi-Wan. We got the show. We got a comic. We're still getting a comic. It's not over yet. I haven't read it yet. Don't tell anyone.
I haven't. I'm so slow at reading comics, so no judgment. I'm so behind the boat when it comes to them. I'm like, oh, I'll get to it.
I have not read a Star Wars comic since 2020. So like, you got to go at your own pace sometimes. There's a lot of Star Wars to read. There are many, many books. So this summer we were blessed with an Obi-Wan Kenobi story set earlier than we've gotten any Kenobi content in canon so far. And I just, as soon as I put the call out for this episode and you responded, I was like, this is perfect. This is great. We're going to have a great time. And we already are. I cannot wait to talk to you about this book. But I want to go back a little bit. I want to know how your journey through Star Wars reading began. How did Star Wars books become part of your life?
Star Wars books are fairly recent for me. I have the pandemic and having all this time, newfound time on my hands. Star Wars was definitely a real escape for me. It kept me level-headed when everything around me was not. And so because of that, it's like, well, there's only so many movies I can watch, and I will watch them repeatedly. I will watch Clone Wars repeatedly. I will watch Mandalorian and all the new streaming shows we've got, but I'm like, I still want more. And it started on like those, like when you have like the Wikipedia dives, but on Wikipedia, and you just get into like this endless cycle of clicking and reading. And I'm like, you know what, maybe I should just start reading the books. And so I picked them up about starting 2 years ago, and just find ones that like I was interested in that character. I didn't pay much attention to like Legends versus canon because I just enjoy the books for as they are.
Mm-hmm.
If they are considered canon now or not anymore, I'm just like I like to read the stories. It's all like one big thing for me. And yeah, so I'm fairly new, but I like it because it's like I can bring Star Wars wherever I go. I think the first one I read was Ahsoka.
Oh, that is a good first read. Oh
It
man.
was, it's still one of my favorites.
Oh man. Ahsoka, the novel, has a special place in my heart because it was the Star Wars book that brought me back to Star Wars books. It was like there was a huge gap where I was just like doing other stuff, and then like Ahsoka happened, and I'm here. Here we are. Here we are
Yes,
talking
here
about
we
books
are.
on a podcast. I mean, it's becoming quite common for people to say that like 2020 was the catalyst to their Star Wars something or other, them becoming like them doing all the deep dives that they never did before. And it's kind of beautiful. I mean, like in the context of real world things, maybe not so much, but like I know people who started podcasts that year, who got into reading the books, who were watching all the shows for the first time. Like, I mean, making the most of a time in the world. I like it. I approve.
Exactly. I think that of all the bad things, the last couple years have given us the ability to like find enjoyment and joy in the things that we loved as kids or teenagers, and like refining that as adults has been such a wonderful thing for my soul and a lot of like my friends. And I'm glad that all these new communities and like friendships are now forming because of this mutual love of Star Wars. I love.
Yeah. It's so great. I've met so many people online because of Star Wars things, and like you never thought that would happen, and it happens. It's great.
Here we are.
Yeah, I still am kind of upset with myself because I did, in preparation for The Rise of Skywalker, which came out the end of 2019, I did a full Star Wars rewatch of everything. So all the movies, all the shows. And then 2020 happened, and I didn't, have a lot of places to go. And I was like, I really wish that I would have not done all of that last year and that I could have done it now. I suppose I could have done it again. It's
Yeah.
fine.
It's like
Oh,
I'm constantly watching, reading, consuming at least one piece of Star Wars media, always.
I love that. I love that because it's like it's always just like a little part of your day or your week. I mean, that's like one of the beautiful things about having as much Star Wars as we do is like you can pick and choose what you want when you want it, and it's great. Just
Yeah.
like just like this book that we got,
Yes.
Star Wars Padawan by Kiersten White, came out earlier. It's still summer. I had to check myself for a second. It is still summer somehow. Came out earlier last month, actually, July 26th. And it was not her first Star Wars story. She did write a short story for From a Certain Point of View, The Empire Strikes Back. If I'm remembering the story correctly, it was quite a good one. All of them were. Yeah, so not her first Star Wars, but her first Star Wars novel. And as we're going to talk about, it turned out pretty great. So it takes place. Obi-Wan Kenobi is 16 years old. So this is the earliest Kenobi story that we've gotten in canon in the form of a novel. Quite a range of time for him because we've now gotten him, he's a little angsty. He's a little trying to figure out what he's doing with his life. And then we've got him all the way, he's a wise gentleman who's lived a life and figured things out. And we meet him, unfortunately, at the end of his life. Is there a point throughout the Kenobi saga, the stretch of his life that we've gotten, that is like kind of the most like intriguing to you? Do you have like this is the Kenobi that's my favorite?
I love all the Kenobi, every version of him. I'm interested in learning more about, and I think it's the different aspects of his life and like where he is in those moments is what, like I like seeing how he reacts in different situations and like the growth that you see in the change over time. The Kenobi that we meet in the Obi-Wan series, I think, is my favorite. Even although it's like the one that the Kenobi that made me like understand like why everyone loves him. So that I might be a little biased in saying that that's like why it's my favorite, but you see him coming to terms with multiple traumatic events
Mm,
and like trying to avoid it and then having to like face these things head on. It meant a lot to me personally, to see that represented in Star Wars by like such a beloved character.
mm,
Uh, and so I think that that's why if I have to pick a favorite, if someone is really twisting my arm, it's going to be the Obi-Wan series,
mm.
Obi-Wan.
I'm right there with you, actually. I was really excited for that show and very pleased with what we got. Just in that time in his life where he has so many regrets and he's carrying so much and he has to really work through that. It's a beautiful series. If you have not watched it, first of all, how?
I
Second of
know.
all, I'm presumably you're listening to this because you found it on Twitter. And if you're on Twitter and you haven't seen Kenobi, I don't know how, okay, but you need to watch it if you haven't, because it's great. And it really is great to get so many stories with him in it at different points in his life, because as you said, it's that growth, it's that seeing him like deal with different things and seeing, even knowing who he eventually becomes, and what he eventually goes through and what he eventually accomplishes. Like, to see him struggle is really like something we didn't get to see like a whole lot in the prequels until toward the end. And it's really important for a character, even someone like Obi-Wan Kenobi, who you think, oh, he's Obi-Wan Kenobi. He can do no wrong. He can't struggle. He's a Jedi master. But the truth is that, like, to get to the point that we saw him in A New Hope, he had to go through things.
Yes.
As we saw in this book, it began, all the way back when he's at this stage in his life when he's realizing he's no longer, a youngling. He's a Padawan now. He has to um take steps forward and he has to do his Jedi training. And meditation is hard, man. Like, he gets it. He doesn't get it, but he gets it. He's supposed to get it. Um, and it's really great to see, to have that kind of change where you see him like he's really just, he doesn't know what he wants. And you'd think a Jedi Padawan is like, oh, I'm a Padawan. I'm here in the Jedi Temple to study being a Jedi. Well, he knows that. But also, there's a High Republic connection in this book because he figures out who the way seekers were and he figures out like what that means to a point. And throughout this book, he kind of comes to understand that like sometimes there is a different path. And it means he doesn't necessarily have to go on the path that he always thought was the one that was set for him. Did you expect, first of all, there to be any kind of High Republic references in this book? Because I did not.
I'm going to first and foremost say I have not engaged with the High Republic media. I've like seen it. I've observed it from the sidelines. I'm very interested, and this is probably actually the piece of media that's going to get me to like really dig into it. I don't know to say that I would be expecting it, but since it is something that it almost feels like it's like this underground club, like the people who engage with like High Republic content and read the books and consume the media, because it's something that is Star Wars that does not exist on the screen yet.
Mhm.
And I think it's a really cool time in Star Wars history, but it doesn't exist on the screen yet. So I think that like tying it into something that is related, that is Obi-Wan, that is something that maybe people who like don't always read Star Wars books, they might pick this one up because of the Obi-Wan summer, is a really cool way to tie that in.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was intentional or if they were even thinking of that, but I think that, not that I expected it, but this is a great opportunity for them to tie this into it.
Yeah, I did
speak as
not.
them as the collective Star Wars we.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I didn't think that would, like, I didn't expect it, because it's never really happened before yet, because so much of like what we got earlier this year, for example, was High Republic content, and then the prequel stuff that we were getting in Queen's Hope and Brotherhood, it was very focused like on prequels and didn't go back that far. So to have this, first of all, like, until you were talking about it just now, I really didn't think about the fact that like it really could motivate someone who hasn't even like, who's maybe like considered picking it up but hasn't yet, kind of, they get this like subtle reference. You don't have to understand the High Republic to like get it, but it's there. And maybe someone could be like, oh, I've been meaning to read that, or I've heard of that. I don't know if I want to do it, but maybe I could give it a try. That's really cool. And I don't know if that was intentional, but like, I feel like maybe sort of it could have been, or just accidental awesomeness. I don't know.
I think Star Wars is really good. I mean, some people may disagree with me, but I think it is really good at including things from other eras, other projects that the average viewer does not have to understand to enjoy like the media,
Yes.
but it adds like a different level of appreciation to it. Like I think The Mandalorian is a really good example of this. Like I have friends who have no interest in Star Wars. They love The Mandalorian. And then like me and my husband who are like walking Star Wars encyclopedias understand like all the little like references and like things like that. So I think this book is like a literary example of that, where it has like these nods to other projects where it's like, oh, I know exactly what they're talking about. Or if you don't know what they're talking about, what are they talking about? Oh, there's a whole other series about this time. I'll read that. So I think they're pretty good at that.
Yeah. Oh, when I'm talking about the books, I like to kind of say that they're supplemental to other material because they're, you don't have to read them, you don't have to engage with them, but like if you do, there is like that added, like you get kind of more in-depth understanding of what other media has given you.
Yeah.
And so it kind of works the same way, like you said with The Mandalorian, like it's built so that even if you know nothing going in, you can understand what's going on and you can really appreciate it. It's that deeper level of, oh, I know who Ahsoka is. I know her entire story. That episode was great because I know where she's been and I know exactly who she's looking for and why.
It's exactly the episode I was thinking of too.
She has been on my mind lately. It's for no reason whatsoever. Yeah, so like this is a really good example of there is that surface level understanding of like anyone. And I think, with Padawan, like it is a book that someone who maybe hasn't even read a Star Wars book before could come in, could pick up this book, could read it, could really, really love it. They likely know at least who Obi-Wan Kenobi is, right?
Right.
But there are small references, there are small things, we're at some point in earlier in this episode, I did give some kind of spoiler warning. So I'm just going to do this now because it fits. Dex, hey, like I was not expecting that origin story in this book.
Me either. I got to that page and I was like, wait, like as they're describing him, and I think it was either like the top of a page or like it was literally like a page turn until he like said his name, and like I like went back and like I was like, that was such a treat because that moment in Attack of the Clones. So it's like, well, who is Obi-Wan hanging out with?
Right.
That he like knows who this guy is, and that was so fun. I loved that.
Yeah, this book has a lot of those where like I did not expect that, but I love it. And like the Dex origin story introduction, like it's not, I'm going to use the word obnoxious. It's not like, oh, like we needed to have this origin story in here because like it's there and it's perfect. It fits with the characters, it fits with the time, and it connects everything else that we know about the relationship. And the way that the relationship formed is just so chaotic.
Yes. I completely agree. It was a very organic meeting, a very organic introduction, and why it took me so much by surprise when I saw it because I really wasn't expecting it.
Yeah. And now like we can go back to Attack of the Clones and be like, oh, like I know how they met now. Which is great. Okay. Next question I'm going to ask you is technically a two-parter. So have you watched The Phantom Menace since you read this book?
I have not rewatched it but I know it so well.
Because what I'm curious about, because I haven't had a chance to rewatch it yet either. I guess technically I played like the Lego Skywalker Saga level of that, so like I kind of got the whole story again. I don't know,
but the Spark Notes version.
Yeah, there you go. That's a that's a great way to put it. So like I'm wondering, and you can give your thoughts on this too. how this book kind of recontextualizes in a good way how we view the Phantom Menace, because we've gotten one other book before this that also comes before the Phantom Menace with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, not getting along super well and trying to figure things out and trying to connect, which is the whole thing. But in the Phantom Menace, we see that they're vibing, everything's working fine, so to speak. But it's not that way in this book. And it's like, after you've read the story, after like where they were now, will you kind of view that movie a little bit differently, especially like seeing their relationship, and especially the ending, which I don't need to spoil that because we all know how
It's
it ends.
over 20-year spoiler.
It's been that long.
Yeah. I remember seeing it in theaters. Every time I read a new Star Wars book, I see it, there's a new show that's like inserted into the timeline. I always want to go back and watch the next, like the movie that would fall in the timeline after that, and just see how, if it changes my perspective, or just appreciate a moment like a little bit more. I'm almost like, well, I guess this means there's like another book that has to be written between these two, and like I would like to see them getting along the whole time. But I think it makes me think a little bit differently about when Qui-Gon dies, and he like in his dying breath is saying, take care of Anakin, and not like, I was so proud to, because that always bugged me, like watching the movie. I'm like, what? You're just tossing this 9-year-old onto Obi-Wan, and you're not being like, it was so nice being your master and teaching you, but they don't have that relationship. And I think what these books are like confirming is like, no, they aren't this like super close like bond. They don't have this like really tight relationship, and it was never that way. So that wouldn't be something that he would say to him, which gives me a little bit more like, okay, I understand it. I get it now.
Yeah, I think their relationship is very much like, a lot is said without saying anything.
Yes.
And I think a lot of it is like, in this action, this is me showing you that I trust you, which I think is difficult for Obi-Wan, because like he does like to talk.
Yes.
So like, that's really their struggle a lot in Master and Apprentice, is like they're just not communicating. And we see that here too still, where Obi-Wan is just trying to he's just trying to meditate, and he's just like he's doing his best, and he's trying to impress his master, and he's having all these doubts because he doesn't feel like he's doing what he's supposed to be doing. He doesn't feel like in his training he's at where he's supposed to be. And his master is not like, he's not reprimanding him. He's not like telling him, oh, you're doing a terrible job. Like, because that's not really who Qui-Gon is anyway. I mean, by the time we get to, spoilers, his appearance in Obi-Wan Kenobi, then maybe he's a little bit more sassy, but he's allowed to be at that point, I guess. When you're a Force ghost, I feel like you can kind of say and do whatever you want. It's, no one can really tell you that you can't.
Exactly. You're on your own. I do think that the relationship between, in both Padawan and Master and Apprentice, the relationship between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan mirrors in its own way the relationship between Obi-Wan and Anakin. And like the way that it's like, well, he's like, Obi-Wan and Padawan is like, well, he's not telling me that I'm doing things wrong. Obi-Wan kind of does that to Anakin, and like there's the communication issue that they have as well, where Obi-Wan's like, well, like, I'm teaching you the way that you need to do it, and Anakin's someone who like needs to be like very like direct about feedback, I guess. And Obi-Wan's just not that way. So I do think that the pattern of like those relationships in their lineage line kind of repeats itself is very interesting.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because Obi-Wan, having had a very specific master, is trying to be a teacher in the way that he knows how.
Right.
And like, it's not his fault that like Anakin doesn't necessarily always learn the way that Obi-Wan is teaching, which is like, it's tragic, but it's so true to like how mentorships work sometimes. It's like, you can try your best. And it's not even sometimes the fact that like you and the person that you're mentoring don't work. It's just that the style of learning you might have to adjust. And that's hard, especially for
Yeah.
someone like Obi-Wan, who like really, especially by the time he is Anakin's master, is very much like, I cannot break the rules. This is the rule book. This is how we're doing things. We can't veer from that unless for whatever reason we have to survive. Yeah. So man, I never really thought about it like that. And it just makes it even more tragic because
Yeah.
it was no one's fault. I mean, it was all Palpatine's fault. So I guess
It's you. We blame it on him, but it
yeah.
was never Obi-Wan's fault.
No, no.
Yeah.
And he learns that in the series, which
Oh
is
my
great.
gosh.
And it really, like, I know we're talking about this book, but like the mark of a really good TV series to me is I'm still thinking about it months after it's over. And that's me. I'm just over here thinking about it still.
Me too. I mean, it's everything's all tied in. This
Yeah.
book is tied into Brotherhood, is tied into the
Mhm.
series. So good on them for launching these all around the same time, because it was like, oh, we can put all this pieces of this map together
Mhm.
and follow the trajectory of Obi-Wan's life.
Yeah, it's like we have like an unofficial trilogy now. We have Padawan, we have
Yeah.
Brotherhood, and then we have the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. And it hits those very critical points in Obi-Wan's life. Um, we need a novelization of the series. Like, not that they're gonna
Oh
do
my
that, but
gosh.
like, wouldn't that be great though? Like, I don't know, someone just needs to like take the script and just make it into a book. I would read it.
I mean,
Um,
I would read anything. But
same.
my favorite thing is just diving in like deep into these moments, which is why I fell in love with Star Wars books, because
Mm,
it's like you can take this moment in a movie, or this moment that is like spoken about, that is a throwaway line about the
mm,
business on Canto Nimoida, and then
yep.
it's like, oh, it's a whole book.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep. That is brilliant how they can take, you could say, oh, it's a book based on one line in a movie, but it's that and then like so much more beneath that.
Right.
And it adds so much depth. That's what these books are for. They add so much depth in a lot of ways to the stories that already exist. That's why they
Exactly.
call it the expanded universe. It's expanding, what we have from the movies and the TV shows, and just making it deeper, making certain moments hurt more, making other moments like, it's those little things that you might miss at first, and then like a book will come along and make you think like, oh, that is actually a beautiful moment that I just skipped over. Sometimes I'm trying to think of an example as I'm talking and I can't, of course, but I'm sure there's something in Queen's Hope. A lot of that was, to me, was like, because I was never like a huge like Anakin and Padme romance fan, but like Queen's Hope to me was like, oh, like they had all these moments that like, seeing that from that perspective, I get it now. Like I
Yes.
understand their relationship so much more because of this book. That's why
I
we need them.
yeah, and I think that what I love about the books, like what you're saying, is that it gives more to these moments, but these moments are not always like the big moments that they intend to be. And like a lot
Mhm.
of times the new media, the books have to write around things that these movies that were written and produced in the 70s
Mhm.
like set the groundwork for. And
Mhm.
then they do such a good job of like making all the puzzle pieces fit together, that you're like,
Mhm.
did George Lucas have this in mind in
Yeah, right.
1977?
Right.
Like the moment I'm thinking of in relation to Obi-Wan is the moment when Obi-Wan dies
Mm.
and he looks over and sees that the twins are together. And it's almost like a moment of realization after seeing the series. Is like,
Mm.
his work is done. They're okay. They have each other. They know each other is there. They're going
Mm.
to be fine. And that reads totally different than I saw it when I first saw the movie, or when I saw the movie a month ago or two
Mhm.
months ago now,
Yeah.
before May. Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah. I Star Wars is going to keep growing, like not just with the shows and the movies when we eventually get more of them. Who knows when that's actually going to happen? Who knows? They keep telling us things and then things change. That's how it works. But the more stories we get, like there are people who like, for them it's too overwhelming, or like there's too many stories to keep up with. Like I get that and I respect that. But also, the more that the universe grows, the more everything connects in a way that makes you appreciate everything that came before it a little bit more. And
Yes.
that's something about like this huge franchise that has always really meant a lot to me, is that they care so much about making you care about Star Wars more than you already did with every new thing that comes out. I don't know how they consistently do that, but it just keeps happening.
Yes, 100%. Every movie, TV show, book, comic, anything. My first. I'm not a good critic, because after I finished the book, watching or reading something, I'm like, I had a great time with Star Wars. Like I sometimes like think I have to sit on things for like a couple weeks until I
Right.
like can have actual opinions, but like it
Right.
just makes me so happy
Yeah.
to fall in love with this galaxy and this universe, and it makes it feel just so fleshed out and almost like it's real in a way, because these characters are so deeply developed, and now we can see what Obi-Wan was thinking when he was 16 years old and struggling to find himself, which is just awesome.
It is. It is. Obi-Wan does do a lot of questioning in this book. And it's something I expected, but also didn't at the same time, because you have to know, like, even if you're not, like, even if you don't read young adult books all the time, like I do, you have to know that a character at this age is going to be like freaking out because they don't know how anything works. They don't know who they are, where they fit. That's exactly where Obi-Wan is in this book. And he's questioning a lot of things. And one thing I didn't like see coming was him possibly questioning his sexuality. So let's talk about that. I think it's important that we talk about this. So I didn't see this coming. That does not mean that I'm not here for it, because like however you read this, I'm I'm with it. So there's this whole thing, and I'm asking you this for a reason that you already know about. um, Basically, you wrote an article about this that
Yes.
I edited. It's fine. Um, so, um, when I first read this book, it didn't even occur to me that the conversation around any of this questioning he's doing would be, oh, he's questioning his sexuality. He might be queer. When that was brought to my attention, I thought back on it and I was like, oh, that makes total sense. Go you, Obi-Wan, whatever you want to do, right? But I think it's great that the author kind of like left it up to interpretation, because the way Star Wars fandom works is a character can mean to you whatever you want them to mean to you, what it in the context of your life, character might mean different things to you, etc. So did you read it this way when you first read the book?
When I first read the book, I like blatant, it came out, it was like a punch in the face. I was like, this is it.
I love that.
I've also like, if headcanon is the right word, Obi-Wan has always read queer to me.
That is amazing.
I mean, he has bi twice in his name.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Hold on. I need to like unpack like
Right?
25 years of my fandom really quick. Hold on. That I'm staring at his name right now, and it's right there. This
Right?
whole
It's
time
right there.
it's
The
been here
whole
this
time.
whole 45 years. It's been here, and we all missed it. Not all of us. I did. Oh my God.
He's always read that way. He's always read queer to me, specifically bisexual for me. But what I love about fictional characters is that they can mean something different to everyone. But so that was when I read that part, I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. And it's like right there, literally in black and white and on the page. And then when I read it again, I was like, I read it as more like up to interpretation. Which I really like, that it's not like Obi-Wan saying, I am bisexual, I am like aromantic, I am queer. Like he's not using words, because I don't think words like that exist in Star Wars anyway. But I like that it's very much how you want to read it, because one of my favorite things about talking about Star Wars characters with people is they bring up things that I don't notice about a character, or I bring up things they may not notice about a character. We notice things in different characters that mean things to us personally. And I think that enriches the whole experience
Yep.
of loving Star Wars and interacting with it and talking about it. And I think this is the perfect example of that. I mean, there was a lot of internet discourse about this at the time, but I think at the end of the day, it's just that that's a question the 16-year-old would have. That's a question that people in their 40s like think. And it's a very universal human experience. And to have it be Obi-Wan, again, this legacy character who's been around for as long as Star Wars has existed, having these conversations, it's like, oh, they're just like me.
Yeah.
Even though they don't really exist. But I loved reading that. And especially in young adult books, I'm always like, yes.
Exactly. And, that's why it's so important for all of us to pay attention to all the different perspectives we're seeing, especially on a place like Twitter, because, that's where I saw it for the first time. And like, as soon as I started reading more about what people are saying, it just made me appreciate so much more. Like, I never would have picked up on that. Or maybe I would have at some point, but like, that's just not how I read it. But someone else, you immediately were like, yes, exactly. Thank you for sort of maybe confirming that for me. And I love that. I love that because this is one book. It's the same story. Everyone reads the same thing. But the fact that we can all read the same Star Wars book and get different things out of it is just beautiful to me. And yet another reason why these books are so important to me and to all the fans and to everyone, because they mean something different to, as you said, every person who reads them. And that's how they should be.
Fiction is not a textbook. It's not like this is what this event happened at this time and blah 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 blah. It lends like human emotion and human experience, and that's what I love about reading all kinds of fiction, but especially fiction that's connected to like a larger franchise and a larger thing in general, because it's something that like not everybody has read novel XYZ, but everybody has heard of Star Wars. And most people have opinions on it, whether they're good or bad. So that's what I love about Star Wars novels in general.
And what's great about the internet is if someone has a different opinion than you, sometimes it's okay to just disagree and walk away and everything is fine.
Exactly. Good internet advice in general.
Correct.
Just walk away.
I'm trying to take my own advice as best as I can.
Oh, it's so hard sometimes. I'm like, sometimes I just have to go off Twitter because I'm like, I'm going to get in an argument with a stranger. And my husband's like, do you think that's a good idea? I'm like, nope.
Yes.
Turn off the phone.
Exactly. Because we can do that. Remember, your phone has an off switch, or you could just let it die like I did earlier today. Okay. So one important part of the story is Obi-Wan literally doing exactly what he needed to do without meaning to. Thanks, Qui-Gon, for that, which is getting out of his quote unquote bubble and literally going to an entirely different planet where everything is different and nothing is like he's ever experienced before, to give him kind of like that taste of freedom that he needed to kind of decide what path he was going to go on next. And I really haven't, I wrote this question and then I didn't come up with an answer for myself. So I'm a great host. But I am kind of wondering now after this book, having seen the outside world this way and kind of like, because throughout this book, he's kind of thinking like, oh, this could be my life. Like maybe not this exact planet because the entire time it's trying to kill them. Everything turns out fine in the end. But he kind of realizes like maybe the Jedi path, the path that I've always been told I need to follow, is not maybe the one I want to follow. And so this is part of his journey. He's trying to figure out what he wants to do. And I'm wondering now how that kind of changes, how he develops as a Jedi moving forward. Because up until this point, he's been very like, he's trying to impress his master. He's trying to do his best, doesn't always get there. He hasn't really found, his rhythm, quote unquote. And later on when we see him, he struggles, but like eventually he always gets back to, I am a Jedi. I am one with the Force. This is what I'm meant to do. This is who I'm meant to be, and this is who I'm meant to help. I'm wondering if like this book really kind of shapes how he kind of gets there.
I think 100%. I think that when people like hear the name Obi-Wan Kenobi, it's like, oh, quintessential Jedi, like the perfect Jedi. But this isn't the only time he's like questioned that, hey, is the Jedi Order going to be what I'm going to do with my life? He clearly has thought about this, and he continues to think about this for most of his life, for pretty, I would say, until right up almost until the end of his life.
Yeah.
And it makes me almost think that like, because he is so much of that like quintessential Jedi, he is that because he understands what it's like, or can see what a life would be like, has thought of what a life would be like not doing this. So yes, he's a rule follower, but he will break the rules from time to time, something that continues. Like he's Anakin is a big menace, but Obi-Wan is like a half menace. He's the sneaky one. He's not as much as like in your face about it. Like he's not going to jump out of a speeder like maybe Anakin would, but he'll do things like that aren't the norm, that aren't like what the Jedi Order would like approve of. And I think because he has this experience so young and is kind of able to like stretch his wings, it definitely 100% shapes him for the rest of his life. And those decisions that he does or does not make later on.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also, I think, it helps like in your life to like, you look back on those moments where you did try to kind of veer from what you thought your path might be. You kind of tried to figure out like, oh, maybe I'll do this instead, or maybe I'll go this way. Which is what he kind of does in this book. He kind of goes off. He's under zero supervision. He's everything is chaos. And I could see him like looking back on that time and kind of like using it to recenter himself, right? Because he'll remember like, oh, I could have lived a life of complete chaos, but I chose this instead, and there's a reason for that. I really like that. This book giving like that context to like, in his moments where he's doubting, did I make the right decision? Like he can always go back to this.
Yes, I completely
like
agree.
I didn't think about that until just now.
See, another great thing about these books, things like that just come to you when you start talking about it, which is why more people should read them and talk about them.
Yes, exactly. More people should read these books and talk about them, which is why I started this podcast, because there are a lot of people talking about books, but like I just want to do it all the time.
Yes.
It you know what, it's not my job, but like what if it could be?
Exactly. And at the end of the day, it's good work, it's important work, and you're putting that conversation out there. So
exactly. Another thing that I did not see coming out of this book is the message that it sends, that like your world and the earth is important and you should take care of it. Which is a perfect like Star Wars thing to insert a message like this into, but they pretty much learn that like the reason this planet keeps attacking them is because they're taking the, like basically like the energy from it.
Right.
And it's basically like just, it's protesting. It's like you can't do that. And they kind of learn that like when they give back, they get things back in return, and it's that kind of symbiotic relationship. I know that kind of thing is a through line in certain Star Wars stories, and it has been before, but like I don't know, like I finished this book and I was like, I'm thinking a lot about recycling right now.
Right. No, I mean, as I was reading this book, it was like a heat wave where I live, and it's like the hottest time, and I'm like, Star Wars has always been a political entity. It has political messaging, and I'm like, this was not the one that I was necessarily expecting, but I was like, wow, this is hitting really hard right now, as I'm currently melting in like a triple degree heat, and it just feels like it's so, in our world, it feels like almost so overwhelming and hopeless, and seeing it like reflected in Star Wars, where it's like, it is the planet is clearly attacking you because you are stealing the power, you are stealing its resources. If you work with it and return what you have taken, it will be okay. And it's like, we yell this in our world. Also, renewable energy, renewable resources. Stop taking things that are depleting our natural resources and making it harder to live. So I really liked how it was written in, and it fit very well, and it was also very impactful to our world as well as Star Wars world.
Yeah, it was very like, it was woven in so well where it's like, it doesn't preach, but it also is like, it can be very in your face at the same time if you're really paying attention, which you kind of need. And I think like young adult books especially need sometimes, because like, if you're thinking of just the stereotypical young adult audience, like they need to hear this stuff too. We all do, but like to have these messages in, like to specifically tell like this demographic, like, hey, remember that like your environment is important and you need to like not throw trash everywhere or or whatever you're doing. And it was so like, I really love that it was so perfectly woven into the entire story. Which is, these authors are great. Like they're just so good. The authors, the editors, the story group, everyone who's involved in like putting all these stories together. Like we don't get to see like the first drafts, we don't get to see like the outlines, but we get to see the final product and to think back on like what all went into creating these masterpieces. It fascinates me so much.
I think about it all the time. Like my ultimate dream in life would be to write a Star Wars novel. And when I read them, I'm like, the amount of like world building and like new planets and new characters, that having to establish a story in an already pre-established universe, it really blows my mind. And I'm like, the people who write these and work on these on every level, I'm just like, that it's amazing brain power, it's amazing creativity, and it's a very tall order, because Star Wars is a very intimidating place to step your toe into. And I'm impressed every time I read them. Just happy to be here reading them.
Yeah, exactly. It takes a lot. It's probably very intimidating to like come into this and be told like, yes, you get to write in the Star Wars universe. Here are the things you have to follow, but also go make up all these new characters and this name this planet and like this whole
Here's
thing.
Like, a beloved character that like don't mess it up. I'd be like, oh my gosh.
Oh yeah. At some point I will hopefully be having someone who may work a little bit on the behind the scenes happenings of making these books happen on this show, and we'll talk more about how all that works. I mean, as much as we can talk about, because there are things that they cannot talk about, which is fine. Like I'll take what I can get, because it's just it's so good. So we will get there eventually.
Awesome.
Yeah, right now we're just here talking about how much we love these books because it's so important. I really think we need to talk about the ending of this book, and by the ending I mean like the last few lines of this book, because we were told multiple times before this book came out, we were reassured that this would not be the Obi-Wan Satine on the run falling in love story that we still haven't got, that we know is a thing, but we haven't actually seen it played out in a story yet. This book is not that. However, at the very end of this book, Qui-Gon has the audacity to tell Obi-Wan that they've been given a new mission. And where are they going? You can guess, but you'll also know. And it's very upsetting to me.
I'm like, no, just one more chapter. Again, a perfect example of like things that people who know a little bit more than your average viewer, like, are gonna understand and be like, I know exactly where they're going. I know exactly who he's gonna meet. I know exactly what is gonna come of this. But the person who's just like the average Star Wars consumer is like, oh, okay, the story's over, which is also crazy because like the Satine and Obi-Wan story is something that I'm constantly hoping to see more of. I book, comic, a
Mhm.
mention of her name. I will take literal crumbs,
Mhm.
whatever you will hand me. And this was a crumb, and I was like, thank you.
Mhm.
But someone who has no idea, that doesn't watch Clone Wars, that doesn't know this story, would have a completely different reaction to the end of the book, which is just crazy to me.
Mhm.
But yeah, I want more of them.
I just love how she's just literally opening that door and being like, hey, even if it's not me, someone else can just go have fun and write the story now. It's right there. I gave you the in.
Yes.
Just like, and oh, like I know that there are a lot of protections on that story. I know that a certain cowboy hat wearing creator is going to make sure that that story happens exactly how he wants it to, when he wants it to. Like, I get it, but also, how long are we going to have to wait?
Right. Like just something, like something of like deep substance. I was one of the people just like praying the entire time the Obi-Wan series, be like a name drop, a something,
Mm-hmm.
an
Mm-hmm.
acknowledgement. But I understand that when it does happen, and I'm convinced it will, whether it's a book or whatever, that we will see of this moment that they have spoken of and that we know canonically has happened in Obi-Wan's life. It will be just wonderful. In the meantime, there's fan fiction.
Exactly, Obitine. Hey. Part of me is like sort of hoping that maybe at some point, as we get more Bo-Katan and as we get more of her explaining the history of Mandalore to Din Djarin in The Mandalorian, like maybe, I mean, she has to mention her sister at some point, right? Like, she can't like be like, okay, Din, this is my version of what happened, and not mention her.
Right.
I don't know what's going on. I don't know why. I don't know why they're holding on to this. Like, they know we want it.
And they're so they hold on to stuff because of like it's either going to be like spoken about or I mean, I think of I'm a really big Boba Fett fan. I
Mm,
love Boba Fett, and I think
mhm.
he's sitting right here in front of me. I
Awesome.
think about like why they held on to that story for
Mm,
so long, for
mm,
literal decades,
mhm,
and they told it at the perfect opportunity when he showed up in season 2 of The Mandalorian. I lost my mind.
mm,
So I know that if they're when they hold on to something, there's usually a reason for it, or they're trying to
mm,
introduce it in a certain way.
mhm.
The wait is agonizing.
Yeah.
And especially when there's like moments that you're like, well, it could happen here. It could happen
Right.
here. Why
Mm,
isn't it happening here?
mm,
And then you start to get frustrated. But yeah, I didn't think so much about the Bo-Katan connection
mm,
in Mandalorian, and now I'm like, ooh, yeah, that would
mm.
be a perfect opportunity. And now
It
watch me in
would.
like a year get disappointed, or not disappointed, just frustrated.
It's, you know, we have Padawan, we have Master and Apprentice. There's a space right in the middle of those two books. You could do an actual unofficial Obi-Wan book trilogy, and you could give us that story. There's part of me that feels like it's not going to happen in a book, but it would also be the perfect way for it to happen.
I
Or they
hope
could
it's like addressed on screen and then
yeah,
it comes out in a book. Like
there you
it's one
go.
of those
Yeah.
moments where it's like, okay, they've said it. They've like it's been spoken of. It's not just in Clone Wars,
Mm.
which does not make it any less true, but it's in something. It's in something else,
Mhm.
and then the book like really
Yeah.
digs in deep. That would be like my absolute dream scenario.
It's they know we want it. They're paying attention. They get it.
Yeah.
We'll get it at some point. And like they've been holding on to it for so long. They know how it's gonna play out. They know exactly what they're gonna do. And they're gonna give it to us. They're gonna give us exactly what we want and then some. And it's not in this book, but the the seeds have been planted. I was like, what is that phrase as it was coming out of my mouth? We did it. Um, it's there. It can happen now. And whoever ends up writing that story, good luck. Because there are a lot of fans who have been waiting a very long time. I forget sometimes how long it's actually been since that storyline was like first introduced. It's
Right.
been a long time.
Yeah. But what a like gift
Oh,
that author is going to be given when that opportunity comes.
correct. We will see. who it is. I suppose who the lucky or unlucky person is. I don't know. Like that seems like a lot of pressure.
Yes. I wouldn't want to have that burden to bear, but
Mm,
whoever gets it, to be able to like really dig in, like sink your teeth into
mhm.
their
Oh,
relationship, and like that's what I'm excited to read that in the
mm,
future.
me too. In that book, if it's a book when it comes, it'll probably be a young adult novel, as is this one. Um, and the tragedy with young adult novels in general, but particularly in Star Wars, is that they don't get as much attention. They don't get talked about as much, which is why we're talking about it on the show. They're great, but they just like they're like sometimes I have to look back on my at my YA stack and I'm like, right, that book exists. Not because it wasn't good, but because it just people move on from them so fast. And some of it is hearing the label young adult can kind of sometimes turn people off. And I wish that wasn't the case because like Padawan is the perfect example of like what actually a young adult novel is, which it doesn't have to be romance. It can just be a central character on a journey, a coming
Yeah.
of age story where they're just trying to figure out what their next steps are and kind of maybe who they want to become in the future. That's exactly what this book is, and that's exactly what young adult fiction is. There can be romantic elements, there can be other tropes, there can be other things, but like that's the framework of all of this. And I'm curious to know um where this book ranks for you in terms of like the other young adult Star Wars that you may have read.
I would say this is my favorite that
Mm.
is not central to a woman, that is
Okay.
not central to I think that, and that's just my own personal
Mm.
preference. Ahsoka is one of my favorites.
Mm.
The Padme series is Princess of Alderaan considered.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay, yeah. So I mean, he's got to compete with
Yeah.
some
Oh yeah.
pretty tough ladies.
Mm.
But what I love about YA and why I really like it in Star Wars specifically is that I find that I get bored when it gets into like a battle that's
Mm.
written out.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Star Wars visually in like films and TV, I'm captivated. But when it's
Mm.
written, I'm like,
Yeah.
and that's I was a public historian in my past life,
Mm.
and like that was my least favorite thing, was like battle tactics.
Right.
I'm like, it's just not my thing. I'm not into it. And in Star Wars YA books, if there are moments of it, it's not like
Mm.
pages upon pages.
Yeah.
It's the pace is a little bit faster, and it always ends at like a, maybe not always happy, but like kind of like neutral, hopeful sort of
Mm.
resolution.
Yeah.
And I like that, because a lot of the times there's very difficult things in Star Wars, and
Mm.
especially in some of the heavier novels.
Mm.
And sometimes I want to read about my favorite characters struggling, going through trials,
Mm-hmm.
but having learned something from it. And I think YA lends itself really, really well to that in the Star Wars
Mm.
universe. And anytime that I can like go through something maybe a little bit faster,
Yeah.
I appreciate that too. The
Yeah.
pace of YA is
Yeah.
always really nice.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to read, and books just like keep coming out. Like every
Yes.
single month this year, we've gotten at least one new Star Wars book, and I'm like, September, you're a little bit lighter. I'm ready for you. Like I love my
Yes.
Star Wars, but like I need a minute to breathe. I'm not that is not a complaint. I love
No,
it's constant Star Wars books. I'm
I'm
living. I'm
complaining that there's not enough hours in the day. That's what I'm complaining about.
I am never going to run out of content for the show, and that makes me happy.
Yes.
Yeah, back to your point. You have your books like Alphabet Squadron, which are great, but are very, very space battle heavy, and that's
Yeah.
not everyone's thing. And it's very easy to like, even in the audiobooks, like zone out a little bit or skim certain parts because it becomes a lot. It's part of the story, but that's just how the book is designed. And then you have a book like Padawan, which like things are going on, but it's very, as these YA books are, they're very character driven. They're very like, there are those moments of chaos, but then it always comes back to the little bit quieter, like more of an internal look at like reflecting on things or like relationships. Not always romantic. A lot of times it's just like, it's like in this book, Obi-Wan trying to get to know all the other teens that he meets and like who they are and what they're going through. Like that's a big part of the book, and like we need that in Star Wars sometimes. Like sometimes it's not always about the, like it is Star Wars, but sometimes stories about war are about the people going through things and not always the battles, which is fine.
Right. Right. And I like reading that in YA, and usually like the characters are aged a little younger, so they're going through moments in their life that one would be exploring or questioning or going into at that time. And it's again just nice to see these characters that we know from a younger perspective, who they were before we met them. And I appreciate, I think YA just lends itself really, really well to the character aspect, like you said, because they are so character driven. They're not so much like the battle driven or war driven. And the stories I like about people and history and books or whatever is like the people who lived through an event, people who lived through something, what were they experiencing? And I like reading that in YA. And I think that's why this book has stayed like the top, definitely my top 5 of Star Wars YA books, probably in like my top 10 of Star Wars books of all time, because it is such a nice look and perspective at Obi-Wan at such a crucial moment in his life that we have never even touched on before.
Yeah, I really like that we got to see him in this time where he really did need to figure a lot of things out. And yeah, the fact that this book is young adult really works, just like it really worked with Ahsoka, because Ahsoka really needed that moment of like, or that time of, these are all the awful things that have happened to me. I need to figure out who I am in this galaxy. I no longer recognize. It's a great book. I've read it like 5 times. I can't stop. Yeah, if you are listening to this, and like, first of all, sorry to spoil the book for you if you haven't read it, but if you haven't read any YA specifically because you're not sure if it's like for you, I'm far past the young adult range, and I enjoy them very much. It's not about age; it's more about the age of the characters and what they're going through, and it's all pretty universal. And it's also Star Wars, so like I always like to say, don't shy away from it. Not every book is going to be your thing, especially in the Star Wars YA catalog. A lot of books are very different from each other, so like you may gravitate toward one and maybe you're not so sure about another one, and that's fine. But I say try them. They're fantastic, and like most of my top 5 Star Wars books are YA books. This one I haven't figured out where it fits in my ranking yet, but like we'll get there at some point. There's so many good books. I'm not very good at ranking Star Wars things because I honestly just love most of it. It's just all so good.
When it was like the letterbox trend of like ranking your Star Wars movies, and someone just did like Star Wars, I was like, yes, that's pretty much how I feel. I feel like books are maybe a little bit easier for me to rank, but then I changed, like, because I feel like something about film is like it is so set in like your decision, but books, maybe because it's not as like, not everybody reads the books, I'm like, oh, this one's my favorite right now, and then this one's my favorite later. So I feel a little bit more free to change my mind.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. I should start asking the first time I have someone on, what's your book ranking right now? And then like have them back on a year later. What's your book ranking now? Because it's always going to be different, especially because, oh my God, just these books are never going to stop. And that's a good thing. Do you have
I love it.
any other thoughts on Star Wars Padawan? Anything else? Anything else you want to say?
If someone has listened this far in and has not read it yet, read it.
Do it.
It's just, I had like a smile on my face the whole time I was reading it. It's just such a nice moment in his life to get the chance. Like, it's a treat. It's just a treat of a book, and I'll pick it up again probably in a couple months and read it and have different opinions or different like thoughts on things that I maybe didn't pick up the first 2 times that I've read it already. It's just we are so lucky to be living in this time of Star Wars and having all of these books and all of these movies and all of these shows coming out and learning more about characters. So if you want to learn more about Obi-Wan, or you wondered what he was like when he was 16 years old, read Padawan.
Do it, especially if you haven't yet. And like, to be fair, for a spoiler filled discussion, we didn't spoil everything. Like, there's a lot in this book that like we didn't even touch on, and it's all great. And you should go read it now if you haven't, and read it again if you have. Listen to the audiobook, it's great. Star Wars audiobooks are just killing it, as they always are.
I mean, again, the Ahsoka one, I didn't know that Ashley read it, and then I was like, Ahsoka is reading me this book.
I still haven't listened to that yet.
Oh my gosh, you have to.
Oh, it's in my Audible. It's just sitting there waiting for me. I'm ready.
It's amazing. That is hands down my favorite. I can say probably that will never change my favorite Star Wars audiobook, but I love reading them, listening to them. It's all good.
They're so good. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about this book with me. I've been excited ever since we put this together, and like, this has been such a great conversation. All of the most important things about this book that I think everyone should be talking about. And if you listen to this conversation and like, we put ideas into your head that weren't there before, that's why we're here. That's why we talk about books, because it's so important. If you would like, feel free to plug any of your stuff. Tell people where you want to be found on the internet if you want people to find you.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Eliza M. Reese, where I just talk about Star Wars a lot of the time and things that make me happy about it. So if you want to talk about Boba Fett or Luke Skywalker, I'm always down.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. This is so much fun.
And thank you all for listening. If you haven't picked up this book yet and this review has convinced you to change that, it's available in physical, digital, and audio formats. So you can read it at your own pace in whichever form works best for you. Star Wars Padawan is available now wherever books are sold. Now This Is Lit is a part of the Faraway Fandom Network and is produced, written, hosted, and edited by me. Jose Jimenez designed our podcast art. Keep up with the show on Twitter at Star Wars Lit Pod and find the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you would like to support the show, the best way to do that is to tell everyone you know. Spreading the word is helpful. It works. So retweet or something. I don't know. However you tell people about the podcast that you like, do that. For more book reviews and Star Wars book glamour shots, follow Star Wars Book Reviews on Instagram.